Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Eleanor Marrow, a widow betrayed by her daughter's attempt to sell her home, who uncovers a mysterious legacy tied to a lantern and key. She reclaims her power, confronts deception, and finds peace. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly videos uncovering mysteries and truths. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The air in the auction hall was heavy with the scent of wax polish and anticipation, a strange alchemy of dust and ambition that clung to my skin like a second shadow. I sat in the fifth row, my hands folded over a worn leather satchel, its edges frayed from years of carrying secrets. The room buzzed with murmurs, the low hum of strangers sizing each other up, their eyes darting like crows over a forgotten field. At the front, a man in a pinstriped suit adjusted his glasses, his voice sharp as he called the crowd to order. But it wasn't him I was watching. It was her. My daughter Evelyn standing near the podium in a tailored black coat, her auburn hair catching the dim light like a flare. She hadn't seen me yet. She didn't expect me to be here. Evelyn laughed a soft cutting sound that sliced through the room's chatter and found me where I sat. It wasn't loud, but it was precise, like a needle threading through silk. "Say goodbye to your house," she whispered to her husband Marcus, who stood beside her, his hand grazing her elbow. Her words were meant to be private, a taunt swallowed by the crowd's noise. But I heard them. I always heard her, even when she thought I didn't. "Someone else will tend your roses soon." She added, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't flinch. My fingers tightened around the satchel where a single object hummed faintly against my palm. A brass key, its surface etched with symbols I hadn't yet deciphered. It was warm, unnaturally, so as if it carried a pulse of its own. I'd found it years ago, hidden in the attic of the house Evelyn was so eager to sell, tucked inside a lantern that hadn't lit since my husband Thomas passed. The key was part of the mystery, a thread in a tapestry I was only beginning to unravel. And today, it was my anchor. The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the podium, silencing the room. "Lot number 7, he announced, his voice oily with routine. A 3-bedroom estate on Marrow Lane. Historic Charm Prime location, in need of modernization. Bidding starts at $120,000. A glossy booklet lay open on the lap of the man beside me, its cover displaying a photograph of my front porch, the one where I'd once sat with my granddaughter Lila, watching fireflies dance under the old oak. The words "Lot number 7" were printed in bold, as if my life could be reduced to a number, a transaction, a footnote in someone else's story. I wasn't supposed to be here. Evelyn had made that clear 2 weeks ago when I'd confronted her about the auction notice I'd found slipped into my mailbox, its edges crisp and unmarked like a blade hidden in a bouquet. She thought I'd stay home, tucked away in the quiet of my kitchen, sipping tea while the world dismantled my life. She thought I was a ghost already fading into the wallpaper of a house she no longer understood. But I wasn't a ghost. I was Eleanor Marrow, and I was here to remind her and everyone else that I was still very much alive. 2 weeks earlier, the morning had begun like any other. The house was quiet, save for the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I was sorting through a pile of mail at the kitchen table, bills, flyers, the usual clutter, when my fingers brushed against an envelope that didn't belong. It was heavy cream-colored with no return address, only my name written in a precise, unfamiliar hand, Eleanor Marrow. I paused, the weight of it unsettling like a stone dropped into still water. I slid it open with a butter knife, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a single sheet, a printed announcement for a public estate auction to be held at the Ashwood Municipal Hall. My eyes scanned the page, skimming over dates and lot numbers, until they caught on something that made my breath hitch. Lot number 7, 14 Marrow Lane. Three-bedroom family home, historic features, sale authorized under power of attorney. My address, my home, my life. I sat down hard, the paper trembling in my hands. The kitchen seemed to tilt, the familiar lines of the counter and the faded floral curtains blurring at the edges. I read it again, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. But they didn't. My house was being sold, and I hadn't been told. The fine print mentioned a power of attorney, a document I vaguely remembered signing years ago when Evelyn had come to me with soft eyes and a softer voice, insisting it was for my protection. Just in case, Mother, she'd said, her hand warm on mine. For medical decisions, for bills. You won't even notice it's there. That was 3 winters ago, after a fall had left me with a bruised hip and a lingering fear of stairs. I'd been vulnerable, grieving Thomas who'd left me 2 years prior, his laughter silenced by a heart that gave out too soon. Evelyn had been there, all concern and efficiency, promising to handle things if I needed her. I'd trusted her. She was my daughter, my only child. The girl I had raised in this very house. I never imagined she'd use that trust to carve me out of my own life. The key in my satchel pulsed again, a faint warmth that seemed to whisper, "You're not done yet." I'd found it the night Thomas died, tucked inside the old lantern he'd loved, the one he claimed had been in his family for generations. It was a strange thing, that lantern brass and heavy its glass panels, etched with symbols that looked like writing but belonged to no language I knew. Thomas used to say it held stories, secrets older than the house itself. I'd laughed it off then, but now as I stared at the auction notice, I wondered if he'd been right. The key had been hidden inside it, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, and when I'd touched it, I'd felt a jolt like a spark of something alive. I'd kept it close ever since, though I didn't know why. Not yet. I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn's number, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. She answered on the third ring, her voice clipped, distracted. "Mother, is everything okay? I got something strange in the mail today," I said, keeping my tone even. "An auction listing for my house." A beat of silence, long enough for me to hear the hum of her office in the background. Keyboards muffled voices, the life she'd built far from Marrow Lane. "Oh," she said, finally, her voice flattening. "That. I meant to talk to you about it." "Talk to me." I pressed my fingers, tightening around the phone. "You're selling my house, Evelyn. My home. And you didn't think to mention it." Another pause, this one sharper. "It's time, Mother." She said, her words rehearsed like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "That house is too much for you. The maintenance, the stairs, the yard, it's not safe. You're alone, and it's not practical anymore." "It's my house," I said, my voice low but firm. "I decide what's practical." She sighed, that heavy theatrical sigh she used when she wanted to seem patient, but was anything but. "It's not just about you, it's about what's best for everyone. That house is an asset, Mother. It could be doing something useful, paying for a nice place at Willow Grove where you'd have care meals, a community." "Useful to whom?" I asked, my voice cutting through her logic like a blade. "To you. To Marcus. To your balance sheets." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her tone sharpening. "You signed the power of attorney. It's done." I hung up before she could say more, my heart pounding. The kitchen was silent, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself were listening. I stood and walked to the window where the old oak tree swayed in the late summer breeze. Beyond it, the roses I had planted with Thomas years ago bloomed defiantly, their petals a deep, unyielding red. I wasn't going to Willow Grove. I wasn't going anywhere. And I wasn't done. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to hum around me, its creaks and sighs louder than usual, as if it were trying to speak. I wandered from room to room, my fingers trailing over familiar surfaces, the worn edge of the dining table, the chipped porcelain of the sink, the piano Thomas used to play its keys dusty but still resonant. Each touch felt like a conversation, a reminder of the life I'd built here. This wasn't just a house. It was a map of my heart, etched with every joy and sorrow I'd carried since Thomas and I bought it in 1973 when we were young and foolish enough to believe forever was a promise the world could keep. I ended up in the attic, drawn there by a pull I couldn't explain. The air was thick with dust, the single bulb casting long shadows across boxes and forgotten furniture. The lantern sat on a shelf, its brass glinting faintly as if it had been waiting for me. I lifted it carefully, its weight familiar yet strange, and traced the symbols on its glass. They seemed to shift under my gaze, curling like smoke, though I told myself it was just the light. The key was still inside, nestled in its cloth, but when I reached for it, the warmth was stronger, almost a burn. I pulled back, startled, and the lantern flickered, not with light, but with something else, a pulse of energy that made the air hum. I sat on the attic floor, the key in my hand, and closed my eyes. Images flashed behind my lids, Thomas laughing as he hung the lantern on the porch, Evelyn as a child running through the garden, Lila's tiny hand clutching mine as we watched the stars. And something else, something older, a whisper of voices I didn't recognize as speaking in a language that felt like memory. I opened my eyes, my breath uneven. The key was no longer just a key. It was a question, a challenge, a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer, Margaret Voss, a woman I had met at the library's book club years ago. She was sharp no-nonsense with a voice like gravel and a mind like a steel trap. "Eleanor," she said when I explained the auction notice, "this is serious. Power of attorney or not, selling your home without your consent is unethical, possibly illegal. Bring everything you have, documents, letters, anything related to the house or that agreement." The second call was to the bank to a woman named Clara, who'd managed my accounts since Thomas and I opened our first savings account decades ago. "I need to know what's happening with my finances," I told her, "and I need to make sure no one else can touch them." Clara didn't hesitate. "Come in today, Eleanor. We'll sort it out." By noon, I was in Margaret's office, a small room cluttered with law books and framed degrees. I handed her the auction notice and the power of attorney document, which I had dug out of a locked drawer in Thomas's old desk. She scanned them, her lips pursing. "This is sloppy," she said finally. "The power of attorney is broad, but it doesn't explicitly authorize property sales without your input. We can challenge it, and we can revoke it immediately." How I asked my voice steadier than I felt. "We file a revocation with the county clerk and notify all relevant parties, your daughter, the auction house, your bank. It's straightforward, but time-sensitive. Once the sale goes through, it'll be harder to undo." I nodded, my mind racing. What if I bid on the house myself? Margaret raised an eyebrow, then smiled, a glint of approval in her eyes. "You'd need funds, but it's possible. It would certainly make a statement." "I have enough," I said. Not a fortune, but Thomas and I had been careful. There was a savings account untouched since his death, and a small inheritance from my mother tucked away in a safety deposit box. Enough to make noise. enough to be seen. Margaret leaned forward. There's something else you should know, Eleanor. I did some digging after you called. The auction house Ashwood Estates has a reputation. They've been linked to irregularities. Properties sold under questionable circumstances, paperwork that doesn't quite add up. I'm not saying your daughter's involved in anything shady, but someone pushed this sale through quickly. Too quickly. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? I mean, someone wanted your house off the market fast and they didn't care how it looked. Check your deed when you get home. Make sure it's clean. I left her office with a folder of paperwork and a growing sense of unease. The key in my pocket felt heavier now, its warmth a quiet insistence. When I got home, I went straight to the study where Thomas's desk still stood, its drawers filled with the detritus of our life together. The deed was there, yellowed but intact, along with a small notebook I didn't recognize. Its pages were filled with Thomas's handwriting notes about the house, the lantern, and something called the binding. Phrases like, "the key holds the threshold," and "the house remembers" stood out cryptic and unsettling. I closed the notebook, my heart pounding. What had Thomas known that he hadn't told me at the bank Clara was waiting? She led me to her office, a glass-walled room that smelled faintly of lavender. "Your accounts are secure," she said, her fingers flying over her keyboard. But there's something odd. A secondary access request was filed 2 months ago under Evelyn's name, citing the power of attorney. It was flagged, but not fully processed. Someone tried to move funds, small amounts, testing the waters. My stomach twisted. Evelyn. Clara nodded, her expression grim. It's not conclusive, but it's suspicious. I've frozen her access and redirected all notifications to you. You'll need to sign these to formalize it. She slid a stack of forms across the desk, and I signed them, my hand steady, but my mind reeling. Evelyn hadn't just betrayed me with the house. She'd been probing deeper, reaching for the roots of my life. As I left the bank, the key pulsed again, a faint rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I drove home slowly, the streets of Ashwood blurring past their familiar shapes, taking on a new, shadowed edge. The town had always felt safe, a quiet place where nothing much happened. But now it seemed to hide something, a secret woven into its brick and mortar, its history whispering through the cracks. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the lantern in front of me, its glass catching the light of a single candle. I turned the key over in my hands, tracing its symbols. They weren't random. They reminded me of something Thomas had once shown me, a book of folklore he'd found in an antique shop, filled with tales of houses that held power objects that bound families to places. He'd laughed it off as whimsy, but his eyes had been serious. Some things choose us, he'd said, not the other way around. I opened the lantern's small door and placed the key inside, half expecting nothing. But the moment it clicked into place, the lantern flared not with fire, but with a soft golden light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The symbols on the glass glowed their lines, shifting into patterns that seemed to tell a story. I leaned closer, my breath catching. The light formed images, faint, fleeting, like memories caught in a dream. A woman in a long dress standing on my porch, a man carving symbols into a beam, a child running through the garden. And then clearer than the rest, Thomas holding the lantern, his face lined with worry as he whispered, "Keep it safe, Eleanor. It's more than it seems." The light faded, leaving me in darkness, the candle's flame now small and ordinary. I sat back, my hands trembling. The house was more than a home. The lantern was more than a relic. And the key was a promise, a warning, a piece of something I hadn't yet understood. But I would. I had to. The day of the auction arrived like a storm gathering on the horizon. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy dress with silver buttons, the one Thomas had loved, the one I'd worn to Lila's first recital. I pinned my hair up, added a touch of lipstick, not for them, but for me. In my satchel, I carried the key, the lantern's cloth, and the folder from Margaret, its contents, my shield and sword. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to fight. The Ashwood Municipal Hall was a looming structure of gray stone, its windows tall and narrow like eyes watching the world pass by. Inside the auction room was smaller than I had expected, its folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a projector screen glowing with the words, Ashwood Estate Sale. I slipped in quietly, taking a seat in the fifth row, my satchel on my lap. The room filled slowly, men in suits, a couple whispering excitedly, a woman with a notepad and a real estate badge. And then Evelyn striding in with Marcus, her coat sweeping behind her like a cape. She looked every inch the woman in control, her tablet glowing in one hand, her posture sharp and unyielding. She didn't see me at first. I watched her settle into the second row, her movements precise, her smile practiced. Marcus flipped through a catalog, his expression bored, as if this were just another errand. I wondered what she'd told him, how she'd justified selling my home out from under me. Did he know about the power of attorney, the bank, the secrets I was only beginning to uncover? The auctioneer stepped to the podium, his tan too, even his smile too polished. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "Let's begin with lot number 1. I held my paddle number 117 in both hands, its weight grounding me. The key in my satchel pulsed faintly, a reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about the house. It was about everything it held, everything it hid. The bidding moved quickly through the first few lots. Vacant lots, a condemned warehouse, a small cottage on the edge of town. I listened, noting the patterns. A man in a gray suit always opened the bids, his paddle flicking up like a reflex. A woman in the third row countered him, her bids precise and aggressive. Evelyn didn't move her paddle, resting on her lap. She was waiting for lot number 7, for my house. When the auctioneer called it, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Lot number 7, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "A 3-bedroom estate on Marrow Lane. Historic charm, great bones, prime neighborhood. Property cleared for expedited transfer. Shall we start at 120,000? Evelyn's paddle shot up number 103, her movement swift and certain. 120, she said, her voice clear. Marcus glanced at her, then away, as if he didn't want to be part of this. The auctioneer nodded. 120. Do I hear 125? Another paddle rose, a man in the back, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. 125, he called, his voice low, almost a growl. Evelyn's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. She hadn't expected competition, neither had I. Who was he, and why did he want my house? The auctioneer continued. 125. Do I hear 130? I raised my paddle, slow and deliberate, my heart steady, despite the eyes turning toward me. 130. I said, my voice cutting through the room like a bell. Evelyn spun in her seat, her face paling, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mother," she said the word, half question, half accusation. Marcus froze, his catalog slipping to the floor. The room shifted, a ripple of whispers spreading like wildfire. The auctioneer glanced at me, then at Evelyn, his brow furrowing. 130 to number 117, he said. Do I hear 135? Evelyn's paddle rose again, her lips tight. 135. I didn't hesitate. 140, I said, my paddle steady. The key in my satchel burned now, its warmth spreading through my fingers. The man in the back raised again. 145. Evelyn's face flushed. her eyes darting between me and the stranger. She leaned toward Marcus, whispering something sharp, but he shook his head, his expression uneasy. The auctioneer's voice cut through. 145. Do I hear 150? I raised my paddle again. My gaze locked on Evelyn's. 150. The room was alive now. Murmurs growing louder, heads turning. Evelyn stood her chair, scraping against the floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough to halt the auctioneer. "There's a misunderstanding. That woman, she's my mother. She doesn't have the authority to bid." The auctioneer frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of bidding. I have the authority." I said, my voice calm, but unyielding. I reached into my satchel and pulled out the folder, holding it up like a talisman. Legal revocation of power of attorney, signed and notarized, filed with the county clerk 3 days ago. The sale of this property is invalid without my consent. Evelyn froze her mouth, opening then closing. The auctioneer stepped down from the podium, taking the folder from my hand. He scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. The man in the back leaned forward, his face still shadowed, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Who was he? And why did I feel like he knew more about my house than I did? "This changes things," the auctioneer said quietly, handing the folder back. "We'll need to pause the sale of lot number 7 pending legal review." Evelyn's face was a storm, disbelief, fury, something like fear. "Mother," she hissed, stepping toward me. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," I said, my voice steady. The key pulsed again, and for a moment I swore I heard it whisper a single word: home. The room erupted into hushed chaos, people standing, whispering, glancing between me and Evelyn. The man in the back slipped out his hat low, his movements silent as a shadow. I watched him go, a knot forming in my chest. There was something about him, something I couldn't place, but it felt like a warning. The lantern, the key, the house, they were all tied together, and I was only beginning to see the threads. Evelyn followed me into the hallway, her heels clicking like gunfire. "Mother," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "What the hell is this?" I turned, meeting her gaze. "You tried to sell my house, Evelyn. My life. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" She crossed her arms, her chin lifting. "You're being dramatic. I was trying to help you. That house, it's a burden. You can't keep up with it." "It's my burden," I said, my voice low. "And you don't get to decide what I carry." Her eyes flickered a crack in her armor, but she pressed on. "You signed the papers. You gave me the right. I gave you my trust," I interrupted. "And you used it to erase me." She flinched just barely, but I saw it. For a moment, she wasn't the polished woman in the black coat, but the girl I had once held, the one who'd cried in my arms when her first love left her. But that girl was gone, buried under years of distance and ambition. "You don't understand," she said softer now. "I was trying to protect you from what I asked, from my own life." She didn't answer. The key in my satchel pulsed again, and I felt it a pull, a certainty. This wasn't just about the house. It was about something bigger, something hidden in the walls, in the lantern, in the symbols I couldn't read. And I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The hallway outside to the auction room was a tunnel of echoes, the lemon polish scent mingling with the faint musk of old paper. Evelyn's heels had stopped clicking behind me, her silence louder than her words. I didn't turn back. My satchel hung heavy at my side, the brass key inside it pulsing like a heartbeat, its warmth seeping through the leather. The lantern's glow from 2 nights ago lingered in my mind, those shifting symbols and fleeting images. Thomas the House, a woman I didn't know, whispering secrets I wasn't yet ready to hear. But I would be. I had to be. I stepped into the afternoon light, the sycamore trees along Ashwood's main street casting dappled shadows across the pavement. The air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of approaching autumn. My car waited in the lot, a modest sedan. Thomas and I had bought a decade ago. Its dashboard faded from years of sun. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands steady on the wheel, but my thoughts were a storm. Evelyn's face pale, disbelieving a flicker of fear haunted me. She hadn't expected me to fight. She hadn't expected me to be there. But the key in my satchel, the lantern in my attic, the house itself, they were all pulling me towards something larger, something I couldn't yet name. As I drove back to Merrow Lane, the town of Ashwood unfolded around me, its quiet streets hiding a pulse I'd never noticed before. The old bookstore with its peeling sign, the diner where Thomas and I used to share coffee on Sunday mornings, the church steeple piercing the sky, they all felt different now, as if the auction had cracked open a hidden layer of the world. Margaret's words echoed. The auction house has a reputation, irregularities. And then there was the man in the wide-brimmed hat, his shadowed face watching me as he slipped out of the room. Who was he? Why had he bid on my house? The key warmed against my thigh, and I wondered if it knew something I didn't. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with its familiar silhouette gabled roof, wide porch, the oak tree standing sentinel in the front yard. The gate squeaked. As I pushed it open, a sound so familiar it was like a breath. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and the house seemed to exhale its creaks and sighs, wrapping around me like an embrace. I set the satchel on the kitchen table, the key's warmth lingering on my palm. The lantern was still in the attic, but I didn't go to it. Not yet. There was work to be done. The house was a living thing, or so Thomas used to say. It's got a soul, Eleanor. He'd tell me his hands tracing the worn banister as if reading Braille. Built in 1892, and it's seen more than we ever will. I'd laughed, then dismissing his whimsy, but now standing in the living room, I felt it. The walls held stories mine, Thomas's, Evelyn's, and others I didn't know. The oak floorboards creaked under my feet, the same spot where Evelyn took her first steps, her tiny hands clutching my fingers. The fireplace mantel bore a faint scratch from the time Thomas tried to carve a heart for our 10th anniversary, his knife slipping in his laughter. And the piano, its keys yellowed, but still resonant, carried the echo of his melodies, simple tunes he'd played to make me smile. I walked to the piano, my fingers brushing the dust from its surface. The air felt thick, as if the house were watching me waiting. I sat and pressed a key, a single note ringing out, clear and mournful. The sound stirred something, a memory sharp enough to cut. It was 1973, the year we bought this house. I was 24, Thomas 27, our savings just enough for a down payment. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper, but we saw possibility: 2 rocking chairs on the porch, a garden for roses, a nursery for the child we hoped to have. Evelyn came a year later, born on a rainy April morning, her cries filling the house like a song. I'd sat in the nursery, her small body warm against my chest, and thought, this is everything. The memories came faster now, unbidden like water breaking through a dam. Evelyn's first tantrum sprawled on the kitchen floor over a broken crayon. Her first heartbreak sobbing on the porch while a boy paced in the yard, too young to know how to fix what he'd broken. The summer we painted the living room blue because Thomas said it reminded him of the sea. The winter he lost his job and we sat by the fire planning a future we couldn't see. And then the final winter, when his heart gave out, leaving me to carry the house alone. I stood, my hands trembling, and walked to the hallway. There on the wall was a faint dent from the time Thomas tried to move a bookshelf, his laughter echoing as it tipped. On the porch rail, hidden under layers of paint, were Evelyn's initials carved when she was 16, thinking I wouldn't notice. I had, but I'd never said anything. Some secrets were meant to be kept. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a tapestry woven with every moment I'd lived, every love I'd held, every loss I'd survived. Evelyn saw it as a liability, a thing to be sold, but to me, it was sacred. And now, with the auction paused but not canceled, I knew the fight wasn't over. The key in my satchel, the lantern's glow, the stranger at the auction, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and I was determined to solve it. I returned to the kitchen and opened the satchel, pulling out the folder from Margaret. The revocation of power of attorney was there, its notarized pages crisp and official, but I needed more. I needed to understand why Evelyn had done this and why the house seemed to matter to someone else. I called Margaret again, her voice steady on the other end. "Eleanor, I've been digging deeper into Ashwood Estates," she said. "There's a pattern. Properties sold quickly, often historic ones, with owners who didn't know until it was too late. Your house isn't the only one." "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. I found records of 3 other homes in Ashwood sold under similar circumstances. Power of attorney. Vague authorizations, owners pushed out. 2 of them were on Marrow Lane decades ago. And there's a name that keeps popping up, Victor Hargrove. He's a silent partner in the auction house, but he's got ties to real estate deals across the county. No one knows much about him, but he's influential. The name sent a shiver through me. "Was he at the auction today?" "I don't know," Margaret admitted. "But I'll keep looking. In the meantime, check your deed again. And Eleanor, be careful. This feels bigger than just your daughter." I hung up, my mind racing. Victor Hargrove. The man in the wide-brimmed hat. I went to Thomas's desk, pulling out the deed and the strange notebook I'd found yesterday. The deed was clean, no liens or irregularities, but the notebook was another matter. Thomas's handwriting filled its pages, cryptic notes about the house, the lantern, and something he called the binding. One entry stood out. "The key is the anchor. The house is the threshold. Don't let them take it, Eleanor. They've tried before." My breath caught. Who were they? And what did the house hold that was worth betraying me for? I flipped through the notebook, finding sketches of the lantern's symbols maps of Marrow Lane and a reference to a covenant tied to the land. Thomas had never mentioned this, but then he'd always been private about his family's history, saying it was old stories, nothing more. I'd trusted him just as I had trusted Evelyn. And now both trusts felt like traps. I took the notebook to the attic where the lantern waited. Its brass was dull in the dim light, but when I touched it, the symbols flared again, glowing softly. I placed the key inside, and the lantern pulsed its light, casting images on the attic walls, flickering scenes of the house through time. A woman in a long dress planting roses, a man carving beams of fire that never touched the walls. And then Thomas holding the key, his face shadowed as he whispered, "It's ours to protect." The light faded, leaving me in darkness, my heart pounding. The house was more than a home. It was a guardian, and I was its keeper. The next morning, I drove to the library, a squat brick building at the edge of Ashwood. The librarian, Mrs. Callahan, was a friend from my book club, her glasses perpetually perched on her nose. "Eleanor, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said as I approached the reference desk. "Maybe I have," I replied, half serious. "I need everything you have on Marrow Lane history property records, anything unusual." She raised an eyebrow but didn't question me. An hour later, I was surrounded by dusty tomes and microfiche records. Marrow Lane, it turned out, was older than Ashwood itself. Its house is built on land once owned by a family called the Marrows, my family through Thomas. The records mentioned a covenant tied to the land, a legal and spiritual agreement that bound the houses to their owners. One passage from a 19th century journal sent a chill through me. The house at 14 Marrow Lane holds the threshold. The lantern lights the way. Beware those who seek to claim it. I copied the passage, my hands shaking. The journal didn't say what the threshold was, but it mentioned a key, a lantern, and a warning about outsiders who coveted the land's power. Was this what Evelyn had stumbled into? Or was she working with someone Hargrove, perhaps, who knew more than she did? I thought of the stranger at the auction, his shadowed face, his bid. He wasn't there by chance. When I got home, I called Lila my granddaughter. She was 22, living 2 towns over. Her voice, always a balm to my frayed nerves. "Nana," she answered, her cheer cutting through the static. "You okay? You sound off." "I'm fine, sweetheart." I lied, then softened. "I just needed to hear you." We talked for 20 minutes, her job at a bookstore, her cat's latest antics, a novel she thought I'd love. I didn't tell her about the auction, not yet. Some betrayals were too heavy to share. But as we spoke, I felt the key in my pocket, its warmth, steadying me. Lila was my anchor, the one person who saw me not as a burden, but as Eleanor. "Can I come by this weekend?" she asked. "Please," I said, smiling. "Bring that pie you keep promising." She laughed. "This time, I mean it." After we hung up, I sat at the dining table, the lantern before me. I didn't light it, but I felt its pull like a tide drawing me in. I opened Thomas's notebook again, finding a new entry. "The covenant is sealed by choice. The house chooses its keeper. If it falls to the wrong hands, the threshold opens." I didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a warning. I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for something ancient, something tied to the land, to my family, to me. The next few days were a blur of preparation. I met with Margaret again, who had new information. "Hargrove's name is on a trust that owns half of Ashwood Estates," she said. "He's been buying up properties on Marrow Lane for years quietly. Your house is the last one he doesn't control." "Why?" I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated. "I don't know. But the records show he's been at it since the 1970s. He's patient Eleanor, and he's not alone. There's a group investors, maybe more, who've been circling your street for decades." I thought of the stranger at the auction, the lantern's images, Thomas's notes. "What do they want?" Margaret shook her head. "Power, money, something else." "I'm still digging. But you need to be ready. The auction house is fighting the revocation. They're claiming it was filed improperly." My heart sank, but the key pulsed, a reminder of my resolve. "What do I do? Show up," she said. "Keep fighting, and watch your back." I went to the bank next, meeting Clara in her glass-walled office. She'd found more irregularities, small withdrawals attempted under Evelyn's name, blocked by the bank's safeguards. She didn't get far, Clara said, but someone coached her. The requests were too precise, too legal. "Hargrove?" I asked. "Maybe," Clara said, "or someone working for him. I've locked everything down, but you need to check your safety deposit box. Make sure nothing's been tampered with." The safety deposit box held my mother's inheritance, a modest sum, but enough to bid if I needed to. I checked it that afternoon, finding everything intact, but I added a new layer of security, ensuring only I could access it. As I left the bank, I saw a man across the street, his hat low, his posture too still. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was him. The stranger from the auction. He didn't move, but I felt his gaze heavy as a storm cloud. The key burned in my pocket, and I hurried to my car. That night, I sat in the attic with the lantern Thomas's notebook open beside me. I placed the key inside, and the light flared again, brighter this time. The images were clearer, a woman standing on my porch, her hands raised as if warding off something unseen, a man carving symbols into the oak tree, a fire that burned without consuming. And then Thomas, his voice clear in the flickering light. The house is a threshold, Eleanor. It holds something ancient. The key binds you to it. Don't let them take it. The light faded, and I sat in the dark, my heart racing. The house was more than a home. It was a gate, a boundary, a power I didn't understand, but felt in my bones. And Evelyn, knowingly or not, had tried to give it away. I thought of her laughter at the auction, her certainty that I'd fade quietly. She didn't know me anymore. Maybe she never had. I wrote in my notebook a blue leather journal Thomas had given me years ago. September 12th. Today I saw the house for what it is. Today I chose to fight. Tomorrow I'll learn why. The key lay beside the lantern, its symbols catching the moonlight. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew one thing: I wasn't just fighting for my home. I was fighting for my place in a story older than I had ever imagined. The weekend brought Lila her car pulling into the driveway with a crunch of gravel. She stepped out, arms full of bags, her smile bright despite the gray sky. Nana. I brought the pie she called kicking off her boots as she stepped inside. And it's homemade, I swear. I laughed, the sound surprising me. I'll believe it when I taste it. She hugged me, her warmth cutting through the chill that had settled in my chest. We moved to the kitchen where she set out plates and a slightly lopsided apple pie. As we ate, she studied me, her eyes sharp. "You're not okay," she said softly. "What happened?" I hesitated, then told her. Not everything, not the lantern, not the key, but the auction, Evelyn's betrayal, the fight to keep the house. Her face darkened, her fork pausing midair. "She did what?" "She thought I wouldn't fight," I said. "She thought I'd let it go." Lila shook her head, her voice fierce. "You're a badass, Nana. She doesn't know who she's messing with." I smiled, but it was bittersweet. I wish she did. We talked for hours, the pie surprisingly good, its crust flaky and tart. Lila didn't press for details, but she stayed her presence a reminder that I wasn't alone. As we cleared the table, she glanced out the window. "Someone's outside," she said, her voice low. I froze, my heart lurching. I peered through the curtains, expecting the man in the hat, but it was just a neighbor walking their dog. Still, the unease lingered. "It's nothing," I said, but I wasn't sure. That night, I showed Lila the lantern, though I didn't light it. "Grandpa loved this thing," she said, tracing its symbols. "He used to say it told stories." "Did he ever tell you what kind?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just that it was special. He said it belonged to the house like it was part of it." I nodded, the key heavy in my pocket. "It is." The next week was a battle of nerves. Margaret called with updates the auction house was pushing back, claiming the revocation was invalid due to a technicality. "They're stalling," she said. "Hargrove's name is all over this. He's got money, Eleanor, and he's not used to losing." I went back to the library, digging deeper into Merrow Lane's history. I found a newspaper clipping from 1923 about a fire that destroyed every house on the street except mine. The article called it a miracle, but a handwritten note in the margin in Thomas's hand said, "Not a miracle." The threshold held. I found another record from 1892 when the house was built. It mentioned a keeper, a woman named Abigail Merrow, who bound the land with a ritual no one understood. The symbols on the lantern matched those described in the record. I called Clara again, who confirmed the safety deposit box was secure, but warned me about new activity on my account's attempted logins, blocked but persistent. "Someone's watching you," she said. "Be careful." That night, I saw him again. The man in the hat standing across the street, his silhouette stark against the street lamp. He didn't move, but I felt his gaze cold and unyielding. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and placed the lantern on the kitchen table. When I inserted the key, it glowed, and the images returned a woman Abigail standing in the garden, her hands glowing with light. A man not Thomas, but older watching from the shadows. A fire that burned but didn't destroy. And then, clear as day, the man in the hat, his face visible now. Sharp cheekbones, eyes like coal, a smile that wasn't a smile. The light faded, and I knew he was part of this. He wanted the house, the threshold, the power. I met with Margaret one last time before the auction resumed. "We've got a hearing scheduled," she said. "The judge will review the revocation. But Hargrove's people are good, Eleanor. They'll fight dirty." "Then I'll fight dirtier," I said, the key warm in my hand. "I'm not losing my house." She smiled, a glint of respect in her eyes. "I believe you. But there's something else. I found a deed older than yours tied to Marrow Lane. It mentions a covenant of keepers, a lineage of women who protect the land. Your family, Eleanor. You're part of it." I stared at her, the pieces falling into place. The lantern, the key, the house, they weren't just mine. They were my legacy, my duty. And Evelyn, knowingly or not, had tried to break it. I thought of her laughter, her certainty, her dismissal. She didn't know what she'd unleashed. But I did, and I was ready. The Ashwood Municipal Hall loomed like a sentinel in the morning mist, its gray stone walls damp from an overnight rain. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else. Something electric, like the charge before a storm. I stepped out of my car, my satchel heavy with the weight of the lantern, the key, and Margaret's legal documents. The key pulsed against my palm, its warmth a steady rhythm, a reminder of the threshold I was fighting for. Today wasn't just about saving my house. It was about claiming my place as its keeper, as part of a legacy I was only beginning to understand. The auction was set to resume at 10, the judge's review of my revocation papers scheduled just before. Margaret had warned me it would be close. Victor Hargrove's lawyers were relentless, their arguments sharp and slippery. But I wasn't afraid, not anymore. The lantern's visions, Thomas's notebook, the history of Marrow Lane, they had woven a truth I couldn't ignore. The house was more than a home. It was a threshold, a boundary between worlds, and I was its guardian. Evelyn had tried to sever that bond knowingly or not, and Hargrove was waiting in the shadows, his intentions as murky as the mist outside. I walked into the hall, my steps deliberate, my navy dress pressed and pristine. The fifth row was empty, and I took my seat paddle number 117 resting on my lap. The room was fuller than last time, the air thick with anticipation. Evelyn sat in the second row, her black coat replaced by a gray suit, her posture rigid. Marcus was beside her, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he wanted to be anywhere else. I scanned the crowd for the man in the wide-brimmed hat, but he was absent, or hidden. I felt his presence, though, a prickle on my skin like eyes watching from beyond the room's edges. The auctioneer took the podium, his polished smile faltering when he saw me. "Good morning," he said, his voice tight. "We'll begin shortly, pending the judge's ruling on lot number 7. Whispers rippled through the crowd, heads turning toward me, then Evelyn. She didn't look back. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. Margaret arrived moments later, her briefcase in hand, her expression fierce. She leaned close, her voice low. "The judge is reviewing the revocation now. Hargrove's team is pushing hard, claiming you were coerced into signing it, that you're not of sound mind. It's nonsense, but they're desperate." "Not of sound mind," I said, my voice sharp. "They'll see how sound I am." She smiled, a glint of steel in her eyes. That's my girl. Stay sharp. If the judge upholds the revocation, the sale's off. If not, we bid. I nodded, the key warm in my satchel. And Hargrove. He's not here, she said, glancing around. But his lawyer is. Front row blue tie. Watch him. I followed her gaze to a man with slicked back hair, his suit expensive, his eyes cold. He was writing in a notebook, his movements precise, like a predator marking its prey. The key pulsed again, and I wondered if he knew about it, about the lantern, about the threshold. Did Evelyn, or was she just a pawn in a game she didn't understand? The judge's ruling came at 9:55, delivered by a clerk who handed the auctioneer a sealed envelope. The room fell silent, the air taut as a drawn bow. The auctioneer opened it, his brow furrowing as he read. The court has upheld the revocation of power of attorney for lot number 7, he announced. His voice clipped. The sale is paused pending further documentation from the property owner. A murmur swept through the crowd, but I felt only relief, sharp and bright. Evelyn's head snapped up her face, a mask of disbelief. She turned her eyes, finding mine, and for a moment I saw the girl she'd been scared, uncertain, needing me. But then her expression hardened, and she stood striding toward the auctioneer. This is a mistake, she said, her voice loud enough to carry. I have the legal authority. No, you don't, I said, standing, my voice cutting through hers like a blade. I held up the folder from Margaret, its pages a shield. The revocation is valid. The house is mine. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing between us. The man in the blue tie stood, his voice smooth as oil. If I may, sir, my client disputes the revocation's validity. We request a delay to present additional evidence. Margaret stepped forward, her tone icy. Your client has no standing. The court's ruling is clear. Unless you have new documentation, this sale is off. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that, the auctioneer raised his hands. Lot number 7 is postponed until further notice. We'll proceed with lot number 8. Evelyn turned to me, her face flushed. Mother, stop this, she hissed, stepping closer. You're making a fool of yourself. I met her gaze, unflinching. You tried to sell my home, Evelyn. You made a fool of us both. Her lips parted, but no words came. Marcus touched her arm, whispering something, but she shook him off, her eyes locked on mine. The crowd watched their whispers, a low hum, but I didn't care. The key burned in my satchel, its warmth a fire in my veins. I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for myself, for Thomas, for the legacy I hadn't known I carried. The confrontation spilled into the hallway, where the air was cooler but no less charged. Evelyn followed me, her heels clicking like a metronome. Mother, listen to me, she said, her voice a mix of anger and desperation. You can't keep that house. It's too much, too big, too old, too dangerous. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. I turned my voice low but sharp. You didn't ask, Evelyn. You didn't talk. You took my home, my life, and put it on a block for strangers to bid on. That's not protection. That's betrayal. Her face crumpled just for a moment, and I saw the crack in her armor. You don't understand, she said, softer now. I thought you'd be relieved. Willow Grove is safe, comfortable. You'd have people to look after you. I don't need looking after, I said. I need to be seen. She flinched, her hands clenching at her sides. I was trying to do what's best, she said, but her voice wavered, like she wasn't sure she believed it. For whom, I asked? For you. For Marcus. For someone else. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something guilt-fear crossing her face. What are you talking about? I stepped closer, my voice barely a whisper. Who told you to sell the house, Evelyn? Who's pulling the strings? She shook her head, her lips tight. No one. It was my decision. I didn't believe her. The key pulsed, and I thought of Hargrove, the man in the hat, the lantern's visions. There was more here, something she wasn't saying, but before I could press Marcus appeared his face pale. Ev, let's go, he said, his voice low. This isn't the place. She hesitated, then turned away, her shoulders stiff. I watched her go the distance between us wider than ever, but the key in my satchel was warm, steady, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The house was with me, Thomas was with me, and Lila was waiting. Outside, the mist had thickened, cloaking the parking lot in gray. I was halfway to my car when I saw him, the man in the wide-brimmed hat, standing under a sycamore tree, his coat dark against the fog. His face was clearer now, sharp cheekbones and coal-black eyes, just as I'd seen in the lantern's light. He didn't move, but his gaze was heavy, pulling at me like a tide. The key burned a warning, and I stopped, my hand tightening on my satchel. "Who are you?" I called. My voice steady, despite the chill in my bones. He tilted his head, his smile thin. "You know who I am, Eleanor." The sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver through me. "Victor Hargrove," I said, not a question. He nodded, stepping closer, his movements smooth, almost unnatural. "You're a stubborn one," he said, his voice low like gravel underfoot. Most would have walked away by now. "Most don't have what I have," I said, my hand brushing the satchel. The key pulsed, its warmth spreading through me, grounding me. His eyes narrowed, flicking to the satchel, then back to me. "You don't know what you're holding," he said. "The house, the key, the lantern. They're more than you think. They're a door, Eleanor, and I intend to open it." "For what?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Money power." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're thinking too small. The threshold isn't about money. It's about what lies beyond. Your family's kept it closed for too long." I thought of Thomas's notebook, the covenant, the visions. "You're not getting my house," I said. "Not today, not ever." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "You can't stop what's coming," he said. "But you can step aside, save yourself the trouble." The key flared, its heat almost painful, and I felt it, a surge of something ancient, something alive. The air around us thickened, the mist swirling as if stirred by an unseen hand. Hargrove's smile faltered, his eyes darting to the satchel. "You're not ready for this," he said, but his voice was less certain now. "I'm ready enough," I said, turning away. I didn't look back, but I felt his gaze heavy and cold until I reached my car. As I drove away, the key cooled, but its pulse lingered, a promise or a warning. I wasn't sure which. Back at home, the house greeted me with its familiar creaks, its warmth wrapping around me like a blanket. I set the lantern on the kitchen table, its brass glinting in the afternoon light. The key went inside, and the glow returned, softer this time, but no less vivid. The visions were clearer now, Abigail Marrow, standing in the garden, her hands glowing as she spoke words I couldn't hear. A fire that burned but didn't consume. Thomas holding the key, his eyes fierce with purpose. And then new. This time, me standing on the porch, the lantern in my hands, the house glowing behind me, its windows alive with light. I sat back, my breath uneven. The house had chosen me just as it had chosen Abigail and others before her. The threshold, whatever it was mine to protect. And Hargrove knew it. Evelyn maybe didn't, but she'd played a part, and I needed to know why. I called Lila, needing her light to balance the darkness. She arrived an hour later, her arms full of groceries, her smile bright. "Nana, you look like you've fought a dragon," she said, setting a bag on the counter. "Maybe I have," I said, managing a smile. I told her everything this time: the lantern, the key, the visions, Hargrove. Her eyes widened, but she didn't laugh or doubt me. She listened, her hand resting on mine, her warmth a lifeline. "That's intense," she said when I finished. "But you're not alone, Nana. I'm here. And Grandpa, he's with you too in his way." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "I know." We sat at the piano, and she played a halting version of one of Thomas's old tunes, her fingers clumsy but earnest. The house seemed to listen, its creaks softening as if pleased. I thought of Evelyn, of the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. I didn't know if we could rebuild, but I wanted to try. 2 days later, a letter arrived, its envelope plain but heavy, my name written in Evelyn's careful hand. I opened it, my heart tight. "Mother," it began. I was wrong. I thought I was helping, but I didn't listen. "I didn't see you. I'm sorry." It went on, halting and raw, admitting her fear, her need to control her regret. She didn't mention Hargrove, but I sensed his shadow in her words, a pressure she hadn't fully understood. I called her, my voice steady. "Come to the house," I said. "We need to talk." She arrived the next morning, her face pale, her eyes red. She brought ginger snaps, the kind Thomas used to love a small peace offering. We sat on the porch, the oak tree swaying above us, and talked. Not about the auction, not at first, but about the past, her childhood. Thomas, the moments we'd lost. She admitted she'd been approached by a man, not Hargrove, but someone working for him who'd offered to handle the house's sale. "I thought it was for the best," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong. You stopped seeing me," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But I'm still here." She nodded, tears falling. "I want to try, Mother. I want to be better." I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I felt the possibility of it, fragile and new. The key tucked in my pocket was cool now, as if satisfied. The auction was canceled a week later, the house officially mine again. Margaret called with the news Hargrove had withdrawn his lawyers. Silent, his trail gone cold. But I knew he wasn't gone. The lantern's visions had shown him watching, waiting. The threshold was safe for now, but I'd need to be vigilant. I revised my will, leaving the house to Lila, who saw it and me for what we were. She visited often, her laughter filling the rooms, her presence a bridge to the future. The lantern stayed in the kitchen, its light dormant but ready. I played the piano, planted new roses, wrote in my notebook, September 25th. I kept the house. I kept myself. I'm still here. The house was quiet now, but not silent. Its creaks were a song, its shadows a comfort. I wasn't just Eleanor Marrow, widow, mother, grandmother. I was the keeper of the threshold, bound to a legacy I was only beginning to understand. And as I sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance under the oak, I felt it, the house, Thomas, Lila, all with me. The key was cool, the lantern still, but their power lingered, a promise of strength, of home, of being seen.